Good morning. It is 9 a.m. and we are calling this joint meeting of the Lewisville City Council, Crime Control Prevention District Board, and Fire Control Prevention and Emergency Medical Services District Board to order. We do have a quorum, and I got reverb, so I feel really good. Folks, good morning. Thank you all for being here. We are being recorded. This, I believe, is going out on the internets. Are we doing live to YouTube and whatnot? To YouTube? Okay, great. So we are live on YouTube, live streaming. So if there's residents out there, we'd love for you to hop onto YouTube. Microphones are live, hot, and these are the digital microphones, which means they pick up everything. So if you don't want it heard, you don't speak it in this room, simply because that's the way the microphones are wired. The other thing to notice is that they have a very narrow line of audio pickup, so please, if you're speaking, make sure you speak directly into that microphone. If you get off to the side, it will start to drop. So there we go. So that's the pieces there. Facilities are outside of the room. If we do need to leave, just come on out and out to the right or to the left, just depending on what's going on for emergency exits. And I think that covers most of what I need. We do have a section here this morning for public comment. And if you want to speak on an item on this agenda in person, we have to sign up to speak before the meeting begins with the city secretary. Each speaker is limited to 5 minutes. You'll not be allowed to speak again on an item when the city council is considering the item. So we're going to have all that public comment here on the front end. Written public comments may be submitted through e-comments, and to access those e-comments, you can always go to the city's website to use the e-comment link there. Let's see. The secretary, I have two folks here to speak about the King Arthur budget item. Okay, and I have Mr. Bob Foot of 1101 Lady Devance Lane, and Ms. Jennifer Foot, also available here to speak. And if you all would take a moment, come on up. I'm going to ask if you could stand right here to my left so that we can capture that. And I think we've got a microphone here following you.
Good morning. I think Patrick's probably tired of us bothering him every morning about our problems, but we thank you for considering this issue. What we've got, we live at the corner of Lady Devance and King Arthur, and we sit outside of our house in the evenings, watch the speeders go by nightly, and racetracks in the evening sometimes. But we were able to get a stop sign put there, but unfortunately, a lot of the people just don't stop, and they don't like going 25 miles an hour either. So we've always thought, well, maybe some speed bumps or some more police surveillance might help. We lived in Boulder for a year or two, and they had a really serious problem with cyclists getting run over and hurt by the traffic. So they put bike lanes and golf cart lanes on the main thoroughfare, the east-west thoroughfare through the city, which tended to work very well for everyone because there was a lot of cyclists that were getting hurt. Anyway, I think that would slow the traffic down significantly and give some comfort and security to the small children that ride their bikes along that road and pedestrians that walk that road almost nightly and run. And so I appreciate you considering this issue seriously and helping us out, all of us out. And it's not just our stop sign that people run and speed through. It's the whole King Arthur thoroughfare all the way from Josie Lane to Old Denton Drive. Thank you.
I don't have much to add except that this is my birthday, and it would be a really nice gift if we could actually address this problem. And I know you're taking it seriously, so I thank you for that. So I drive at 25 miles an hour, and people get very angry and try and pass me because they think it's a two-lane road when it's actually a single lane. It does say do not pass, but people don't look at the signs or don't want to. And the road does make you want to drive faster because it goes downhill. And they still slam on their brakes at the other side of the bridge because there used to be a flashing 25-mile-an-hour sign there. So out of habit, they'll speed, and then they slam on their brakes when they come to the houses. Where we are, it's pretty open, although they're starting to build houses there now too, but people don't seem to want to stop. So anything you can do would be great. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the public comment. City Secretary, do we have any digital comments? Item B, regular hearing, consideration of the preliminary budget for fiscal year 23-24 as submitted by the city manager, including discussion on the tax rate, water and sewer rates, and the stormwater drainage rates. Staff is going to provide a presentation that includes the following: submission of the preliminary budget document, discussion of budget process and an overview of guidelines, discussion of an overview of funds, discussion of base budget by the City Council priority, discussion on ARPA funding allocation, discussion and recommendation for unfunded items, discussion of tax rate information, discussion of water, sewer, and stormwater rate information. It is recommended that the City Council approve for discussion at the upcoming public hearing the City Manager's preliminary budget as presented and amended, which includes expenditures based on a proposed tax rate of 0.419079, a 4.3% increase in water and sewer rates, and a $1 increase in the stormwater drainage utility charge for single-family residential properties, and a 35-cent increase in the stormwater drainage utility charge for non-single-family residential properties. City Manager?
Mayor. Thank you, Mayor. So I am pleased to present your 23-24 proposed preliminary budget after years of dealing with the financials related to COVID, as well as our annexation, which were just unusual years for all of us. We're really returning to a more normalized operation this year. But that doesn't mean that there were not pressures on this budget. Specifically, with the compensation study that we approved this year, those costs, full actualized costs, were burdening this budget from the very beginning, and we knew that going into this. On top of that, we have inflation. Inflation still is a real thing, and cost increases for all operations, and so just maintaining the same amount of a budget wouldn't get you as far as it gets you today, because we're having vendors coming in and some of them doubling prices on things that were, and that's just what the market is, not that one vendor is holding us hostage. That's just what the market is charging for things. We are seeing some benefits, though, to this budget as well, specifically because we don't have the destination sales tax bill did not pass, and we are able to assume some of the sales tax that we had been buffering and projecting intentionally to be deflated, because we were worried that money would be taken away from us, sales tax dollars, and sent to other cities. That bill did not pass, and so we're able to take that sales tax and actually utilize it in this budget. So that helped provide some relief. Property values are increasing, and we know that our residents are feeling a push, and so are our businesses. And so with the property values increasing, we also saw $720 million in new value put on our books. That is, and we'll talk about it later, going to be pushing our property tax rates down, and we'll talk about exactly what that looks like. But before we get started, I did want to thank all of the department directors. This has been an interesting year for budget because of these pressures we talked about. They've done a really excellent job, and obviously getting input from their staff to be able to tell us what are the needs of their teams. Also want to thank our budget team, so Deanne and Ashley, Dave Erb in finance, as well as Gina, for all of their work. They are, once the directors hand it off to them, they pull it together. And then also want to thank the city secretary's office, who's taken a larger role in this production this year, which is great, as well as really pretty much everyone, facilities, community relations, and tourism, for helping put together this event, as well as Caitlin Watts in our office, who is helping make sure everything runs smoothly behind the scenes. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started.
The city's budget process takes place every year from February to September. It begins with preparations for the council retreat, during which the council establishes the priorities for the upcoming budget cycle. Subsequently, we transition into the phase of departmental preparation and reviews, followed by council's assessment and contribution, as well as input from residents. The final stages encompass adoption of the budget and adoption of the tax rate, both of which occur in September. We're going to take a look at some of the city's budgetary policies, directives, and guidelines. The fund balance and minimum reserve. Fund balance represents the residual amount obtained when the city's current liabilities are subtracted from its current revenues. To ensure fiscal stability, all city funds with outstanding debt, including the general fund, are required to maintain a fund balance equivalent to a minimum of 20% of the operating expenditure budget. Additionally, the fund balance for debt service will be managed to not exceed 15% of the outstanding principal for general obligation, or GO debt. The budget allocated for projected sales tax revenue should not surpass the revised estimate for the ongoing fiscal year, and we'll review this a little bit more on future slides. And the diversified revenue sources, the city is dedicated to avoiding over-reliance on any particular revenue stream, such as sales tax. By diversifying our revenue sources, we can mitigate risks and maintain a more resilient financial foundation. In the operating funds, the budget should be balanced, and this means that the ongoing appropriations do not exceed revenues. In addition, one-time revenues will not be utilized for ongoing expenditures. This ensures that we are not relying on non-recurring sources. In the utility fund, annually we conduct a comprehensive cost of service rate study. This analysis aids in determining whether any adjustments to rates are necessary. These adjustments aim to cover the operational budget requirements and debt obligations effectively. We'll hear more about this later in the presentation as well. It's essential to remember that our utility fund revenues are projected based on typical conditions, not accounting for extreme weather conditions like unusually wet or dry years. This measured approach to revenue projection ensures consistency and predictability in our financial planning. For the operating fund expenditures, we allocate funds with the aim of maintaining the existing quality and scope of services. Expenditures are budgeted in one of 5 categories: personal services, materials and supplies, services and charges, transfers, and capital outlays. Budget development guidelines serve as essential tools for staff members to formulate the budget. They empower the staff to construct the budget while aligning with priorities, which encompass both council and resident perspectives, as well as future requirements, objectives, and anticipated financial necessities.
So this debt-to-cash funding illustration shows the percent of capital projects that are either funded by bonds or for cash. This is something that we've desired to increase over a period of time. We're doing this primarily which started with the utility revenue bonds. Leveraging, using too much debt to support your capital has a negative impact on the bond rating. So we're very careful to not over-leverage our position. So these 2 illustrations show on the GO side, the percentage of capital projects that are funded by debt versus cash, and then the lower illustration shows utility fund. You can see we're getting close to that 50-50% desired goal. In the general fund, we're at 41% now. The utility fund is at 23% cash, 77% bonds. We have a utility rate study, or we performed a utility rate study that put together a pro forma or projection over the next 5 years, where we're hopefully getting closer. We're going to continue to increase that percentage of funding from cash, and I'll go into more detail with that later.
Before we move on to the next slide, can you remind us what a City Go bond is? What's the highest rating you can have? If we have AAA, what's the highest rating you can have?
Sorry again?
So we have City Go and revenue bonds. What is City Go? Can you remind us what that is, please? The third bullet point?
GO bonds.
Oh, the city GO is general obligation bonds,
Okay, good.
and the
what's
revenue bonds are for the utility fund.
What's the highest rating you can have as a city? We're AAA?
Yes, we are AAA. In fact, we've been AAA since 2013 for both the GO and for utility revenue, which is very rare. It's much more difficult to get the AAA rating.
Highest rating?
Yes,
Thank you.
and we have that from both Fitch and Standard & Poor's.
Thank you.
So one of the things that I think has been an important system that the city of Lewisville has used over the history of Lewisville has been a process that we do for budget that I can tell you from people that come into the city that have been in other cities, it is not a normal process for most cities. And it is a process to assist in controlling the growth of your operation budget. So what that means is that what you get necessarily in your budget last year isn't going to be what you get this year as your target number. We take out one-time expenditures, and we also take any type of adjustments that are made to your budget mid-year. So you go back to where you were last year, and so obviously there's also cost increases. But it's an exercise that forces the directors to basically go into their budget and say, okay, I'm going to have to make cuts. What are the cuts going to be? And then have to ask back for money. And sometimes it can be, worst case scenario, it might be a position. Sometimes it's programs. Sometimes it's marketing dollars. And they have to ask for it back. And then the city manager's office looks at that and goes, have they really actually been utilizing these monies over the period of last year and the history? Do they really need this money? And if not, that money can be cut. And in fact, there were some monies that were cut this year because we saw directors hadn't actually utilized those monies in the past. So really, you're keeping money in a department that could be utilized elsewhere. So that's how we keep our departments lean. But a lot of the add backs are necessities, and so they put them as an action step, and then they get either funded in base budget or we put them on your unfunded list. So I just wanted to make sure that you were aware of that kind of process and that the public was aware of that process, that we constantly are working to make sure we don't have any fat in our budget. This has been a particularly difficult year for that process just because of cost increases. But you know, at the end of the day, the departments are the experts on the needs and the wants of their department. But every department is looking at their specific department. So by the time they submit it, it comes to this team up here to basically balance all of the needs and figure out, looking at a broad view of the city. Are we making sure that everyone has their needs and then some wants, and the wants are really focused on those priorities that council has set. So we'll go on to the priorities. This is just a reminder of the council priorities that were set this last retreat. We'll move on to the next. Then obviously our other guiding light is Lewisville 2025, and making sure that any request for dollars by a department needs to be tailored to one of these or your priorities. Ultimately, our budgetary goal is to make sure we maintain financial resiliency. It's to ensure that department needs are met and that resources are sustainable in the future to meet the goals in the future. And these are the various goals that we're using. So really, when city management is looking at all of the requests and trying to figure out how to fit it into a limited budget, every year is going to be a limited budget, we look at these. But one thing that I want to point out is the last bullet point. We added this because of council's direction during the compensation study. Is one of the budgetary goals is to be at the top 1/3 of comparison cities for compensation. So, and I alluded to some of these issues before, but these were our budgetary challenges. So staffing last year, the budgetary concern there was that we had a large turnover rate. And so you're actually seeing, if you go to the right, that little box there, it says, as of August 2023, the city is at a 9.7% turnover rate. We obviously want to do better than that, but that is down from before at about a 12%. So we've made and that's directly related to your compensation study. But what we're seeing is the budgetary implications to that are some of the pressures and budgetary challenges that we're staying in that top third is a challenge. Infrastructure funding, as always, we have aging infrastructure, and then there's also increasing costs of materials, and then inflation and supply chain issues continue to be an issue.
We're going to move on to an overview of the funds, and we're going to start with the general fund, which is our main operating fund. The revenue outlined in the general fund budget for 23-24 demonstrates a growth of $3.6 million or 2.9% when compared to the original budget of fiscal year 22-23. A reduction of $2.6 million or 2% is reflected when comparing fiscal year 24 to the adjusted budget for fiscal year 23. The revenue within the general fund is distributed across 3 categories: property tax, sales tax, and other. The other category encompasses various income sources, including building permits, multifamily inspections, landfill fees, park fees, and court fines. When comparing projected revenues for fiscal year '24 to adjusted revenues for fiscal year '23, the decrease in the other category is tied to a transfer in that was associated with CARES funding.
On that slide, I did want to just further point out, so you can see that, and in council, we've talked about this before, but really a mantra that has been stated in previous years has been that this council really wants to stay, and the city really wants to stay at diversifying our revenue sources at a third, and a third. That was achievable prior to annexation of Castle Hills, and that was because we were also getting our sales tax dollars. We were, because of the strategic partnership agreement with the Castle Hills area, the water districts, we were able to basically take in their sales tax. We did not take in their property tax at that time. Once we annexed, so we were able to have that one-third. Now, after annexation, we brought in a lot of property value, which really skews the property, how much percentage of our revenue is coming in from property values, property tax rather than sales tax. And so this will probably be the last year we talk about that one-third. Really, the value of that was intended to be that we didn't become over-reliant on sales tax. We were seeing a boon of sales tax in the past, and it was the sense of wanting to make sure we were balancing our revenue and not being too reliant on a source that could have a wide swing, such as sales tax. And so I think this is going to be our new norm, especially with all the property value that's out in Castle Hills area.
That third bucket, other, can you give us some ideas of what kind of things go in that other bucket, please?
Sure. The others are just general fees. It could be your host fees for landfills. It could be ambulance fees. It could be building inspection fees. It's a whole variety.
Thank you.
These charts illustrate the distribution of revenue among the three distinct categories. The chart on the left delineates the division within the general fund only, while the chart on the right provides a breakdown that encompasses the additional sales tax funds, 4B, crime control, and fire control. When incorporating all sales tax sources, sales tax constitutes 41% of the total revenue, followed by property tax at 37%, and other sources contributing 22%. Claire touched on this earlier in her introduction. For sales tax projections, we are observing an increase of $4.5 million compared to the adopted budget for the ongoing year. However, projections are $1.4 million lower than the adjusted mid-year budget for the current fiscal year. Traditionally, sales tax projections for the upcoming fiscal year align with the mid-year estimate of the ongoing fiscal year. For fiscal year 23-24, however, sales tax revenues have been reduced by $1.4 million. This adjustment can be attributed to two factors. First, there is a reduction of $1 million related to one-time construction economic development agreements. Second, the closure of Bed Bath & Beyond has resulted in a reduction of $438,000 in revenue. This revenue was collected during fiscal year 22-23, but will not be realized in coming years due to the closure. Over the last couple of years, the city has been confronted with the imminent threat of destination-based sales tax legislation. If this legislation were to become effective, the city would have encountered an estimated reduction of around $10 million in its sales tax collections. In preparation of this potential revenue loss, the city took precautionary measures by deliberately reducing its sales tax projections. This was done to ensure that the city's ongoing expenditures would not be heavily reliant on this portion of revenue. In the legislative session of 2023, this particular legislation was not passed, relieving the city of the immediate threat of revenue reduction. Since the expectation is that this matter might resurface in future legislative sessions, city staff determined that the most fiscally responsible course of action is to accurately project sales tax projections while limiting the extent to which the funding is utilized for ongoing expenditures. For fiscal year 23-24, $2 million of the $4.45 million increase in sales tax will be allocated for one-time expenses. This strategic approach serves multiple purposes. It reduces the city's dependence on sales tax revenue for day-to-day operations and also facilitates the allocation of funds for new requests within the operating budget. This slide serves to highlight trends in the city's revenue, showcasing areas that have experienced significant increases as well as decreases. As mentioned in the preceding slide, the sales tax increase has been discussed in detail. The rise in revenue from park development fees and building permits is directly linked to ongoing development projects in the city's pipeline. These initiatives are contributing to the notable uptick in revenue within these categories. Conversely, the decrease in property tax revenue is tied to TERS 3, the Tax Increment Reinvestment Zone 3. Traditionally, TERS property tax calculations involve an increment component, with the base amount being allocated to the general fund. However, in the proposed budget, the TERS 3 fund property tax now reflects the entirety of the amount, including both increment and base. Ambulance fees show a decrease of $804,000. This reduction is predominantly attributable to changes in the way insurance companies are processing claims. This slide provides an overview of the general fund. However, many of these trends will also manifest in the other funds as well. An example is the higher add-backs this year, largely attributed to inflationary pressures affecting multiple areas. For comprehensive details on action steps, you can refer to tab 25 in the printed binders or access the online budget book starting at page 277. The fiscal year 24 budget details a balanced budget with both revenues and expenditures projected at $128 million. To address the impact of inflation, add-backs have been allocated at $848,000, while the integration of new programs and positions amounts to $93,000. Notably, the general fund for fiscal year 23-24 introduces just one additional position, specifically an executive assistant for the city manager's office. Budget allocations of $6.3 million have been designated for expansions, improvements, and replacements in this fund. Expenditures drawn from the general fund balance amount to a total of $5.3 million. After the 20% operating reserve, there's a remaining balance of $8.3 million in the undesignated reserve. The next two slides provide a breakdown of the action steps that have been funded using the general fund balance. Many of these actions will be elaborated upon in greater detail in subsequent slides. This slide shows the annual ED agreement amount in the amount of $3.1 million. The specifics of the annual economic development agreements can be found in tab 26 within the printed binders, as well as on page 290 of the online budget document. As I said previously, in fiscal year 23-24, these agreements have been budgeted at $3.1 million, and this is consistent with previous year's allocations.
So on this slide, a lot of things are going on, so I wanted to break them down to you. So this is basically showing your general fund balance. You're seeing the darker teal color is your 20% operating reserves, which is what we, by policy, maintain. And then on top of that, you have undesignated reserves. So this is really showing you a couple things. One, anything that's undesignated reserve, those are things at the end of the year, what ends up coming in. It could be a sales tax that was more than what was anticipated. It could be salary savings that basically get dumped into your general fund and then can be used for one-time costs. We talked about not utilizing balanced reserve for ongoing expenditures because you don't want to be reliant on them. But what this does show you here also is that an interesting way, which we do differently also, which is how we budget sales tax. So sales tax from year to year, we don't budget as any type of projection. Like we do project building inspection fees, growth, park fees might be projected as a growth, knowing what projects there are. With sales tax, we don't. We project as if we were getting exactly what we received in this year, and that way we don't become over-reliant, and if the economy swings one way, we are in a safe position on that. But what that does mean is sales tax usually comes in more than what we budget for, and then that falls to your general fund balance, and then we use it during the budget process right now for one-time costs. What you're seeing under the 2023 adopted, that particularly low number from last year, that was because we were also deliberately reducing our sales tax projections because of that destination sales tax bill that we thought was imminent. When you see the 2023 revised, you would think that sales tax, the actual numbers that came in, would bump this up to around the level of the other years. But what you see there, why it's reduced or why it looks lower, is because we had a very large hit with our Tittle McFadden Public Safety Center. So this is how, that was how where we pulled money from, was from this, partially was from this general fund balance. And then 2024 proposed, this is more normalized. Like we said, we're going into a more normal year. This is a normal projection that we would do, and we will expect more than that when it comes to the actuals that come in, but we just wanted to make sure you were aware of what was really going on in that.
So this next slide presents a long-term view of our reserves. What you've seen up to this point has been what the reserves look like based on the budget. It's a snapshot. What we do is try to extrapolate this out over the next 5 years so that we know that we're maintaining solid reserves in the general fund. So this has a slightly bit of a different calculation or feel as you go through, because it includes a number of years. But we use as our starting point the adjusted budget beginning balances for 2023. We pull from that then the 20% reserve that we have is our general fund reserve requirement. And from there we begin with our beginning excess reserve, money that is available for discretionary purposes. We add to that the additional resources, which is the expected surplus for the budget for fiscal year 2023. So we're putting that in as about $9 million now. That could be due to revenues coming in greater than expected and expenditures coming in below budget. From there, then we remove the uses that we have planned for this year. So for this year, it's $28.6 million for a number of different things, from technology, economic development. We have facilities, which includes the public safety complex, and then miscellaneous other is a number of one-time type uses of funds from the reserves. After reducing the reserves by that $28.6 million, we end up with an ending excess reserve of $17.9 million. Now, this is what we have that's still available that we can use for discretionary one-time type purposes. To be even more conservative, we pull out $5 million out for a reserve stabilization, just to handle any kind of unanticipated, unexpected incidences. So most conservative balances, we've got about $12.9 million of reserves. Over the next 5 years, you see, actually the next budget year and then the next 5 years, you'll see the uses that we have planned. Again, this is at the discretion of council to determine how we utilize that, but we'll have continued uses of reserves in technology, projected land purchases, outside legal, economic development facilities, contributions to various developments, and then again, miscellaneous other. So at the end of 2030, we still have an excess reserve of $10.2 million, and after the reserve stabilization, we still have $5.2 million. So what we're just trying to show here, or convey, is that we've got some structured, planned use of reserves, very responsible, and we still maintain our reserves in the general fund long term, which again feeds back to a number of things, including our bond rating.
I have nothing to add to that. That was perfect.
David, just as you put on your prognostication hat, do you see the bond agencies and whatnot starting to push towards 25% reserves versus the 20% that we hold? I know some of that plays into our AAA bond rating. Are you seeing pressures to have more in reserves for those ratings?
I've not seen an increase, but I think if you don't have some of the other fiscal measures, ratios that support your AAA, then it might require you to have a fund balance policy of 25% or greater. So then that kind of offsets maybe some shortcomings you have in other areas. For us, we're sitting at about 40 to 45% regularly on our reserve, so we're real strong there. But we also have all the other metrics that support the AAA.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so now we're going to move on to the utility fund. Revenue outlined in the utility fund budget for fiscal year 23-24 demonstrates a growth of $121,000 or 0.2% when compared to the original budget and the adjusted budget of fiscal year 23. This chart provides a detailed breakdown of utility fund revenue spanning from fiscal year 2020. It's important to take note that wholesale sewer and water sales were associated with Castle Hills prior to the Castle Hills area prior to annexation. These sales have now been incorporated into the regular sewer service and water sales. This slide is designed to spotlight noteworthy trends within the city's utility fund revenue. It illustrates areas that have encountered significant increases as well as decreases. Notably, both water and sewer sales are anticipated to witness growth. It's important to bear in mind that these projections have been established for a typical year, excluding instances of extreme wetness or dryness. Furthermore, the projections anticipate a decrease in both sewer and water capital recovery fees. These projections are formulated based on planned projects in the pipeline. The fiscal year 24 utility fund budget presents a well-balanced financial outlook with projected revenues amounting to $49.6 million and anticipated expenditures reaching $49.5 million. To address the impact of inflation, a sum of $148,000 has been allocated for add-backs. Additionally, budget allocations of $3 million have been designated for expansions, improvements, and replacements. The current revenue to expenditure balance is available if the compensation plan on the unfunded list is approved by council. If not, this amount will be directed towards capital projects. Expenditures funded from the utility fund balance total of $8.9 million. A number of these projects will be discussed in more detail in upcoming slides. Following the allocation of a 20% operating reserve, there remains a balance of $6.7 million in undesignated reserve in the utility fund.
Quick question here. So just as the name implies, that utility fund is primarily used for utilities. So it's funded by utilities, it's expenditures of utilities, but it's meant to be a self-sufficient ecosystem for our utilities in Lewisville, correct?
Exactly.
Okay.
It's self-sufficient. Its expenditures are supported by its revenues.
Thank you.
Now we're going to move on to the other major funds. Revenue increases are expected in the other major funds as well. The Hotel Motel Fund is projected to witness growth in revenue due to rising occupancy rates. Hotel Motel taxes are projected to remain stable or exceed levels seen prior to the pandemic. So this is good news regarding the Hotel Motel Fund. Likewise, the sales tax supported funds, which include crime control, fire control, and 4B, are all expected to experience revenue increases due to the projected upticks in sales tax. For the Hotel Motel Fund, this budget presents a balanced financial scenario with projected revenues amounting to $2.4 million and expected expenditures reaching $2.3 million. To address the impact of inflation, add-backs have been allocated at $43,000, while $87,000 has been allocated for new programs and positions. In the Hotel Motel Fund for fiscal year 23-24, a position is being reintroduced, an events and promotion specialist for community relations and tourism. This position was reduced during COVID. When it was added back, it was budgeted in the Community Activities Fund. For fiscal year 24, it is being reintegrated into the Hotel Motel Fund now that revenues are resuming pre-pandemic levels. This strategic shift frees up budget for events in the Community Activities Fund, including Western Days. Budget allocations of $205,000 have been designated for expansions, improvements, and replacements. The current revenue to expenditure balance is available if the compensation plan on the unfunded list is approved by council.
I hate to, I'm going to ask this probably for every fund, because if you're just watching from YouTube or whatever, it's really easy to see a sea of funds and then say, I got a pothole over here, why are we spending money to paint crosswalks? And it's important for everyone to realize some of these funds, there's legal obligations, you can't use them for other things. And the HOT fund is a great example. That's arts specifically, is that accurate?
And tourism.
And tourism, okay.
Yes.
We couldn't use that to fund a homeless shelter or fix potholes even if we wanted to, because it's legally, we can only use these funds for certain.
Correct. It's legally allocated for those purposes, tourism and arts.
I'll probably ask the same question on others. So if you want to preempt my questions, if you want to describe each fund as you go through, preempt my questions.
We want them to
Thank you.
understand.
Yeah, thank you.
The next fund that we're going to review is the Crime Control Fund. the crime control budget presents a balanced budget, projecting revenues at $5.2 million and expenditures at $4.8 million. To address the impacts of inflation in this fund, add-backs have been allocated at $22,000, while an allocation of $114,000 has been designated for the integration of new programs and positions. The Crime Control Fund for fiscal year 23-24 introduces one additional position, specifically a GIS developer for the police department. Additionally, the budget designates $609,000 for expansions, improvements, and replacements. This fund is funded with a 1/8 of 1% sales tax, and it is, the use is only for law enforcement programs. The Fire Control Fund offers a balanced budget, forecasting revenues at $5.3 million and expenditures at $5 million. In response to inflation, $162,000 has been set aside for add-backs, and a budget allocation of $348,000 has been reserved for the inclusion of new programs and positions. The Fire Control Fund for fiscal year 23-24 introduces two additional positions, a battalion chief and a fit captain for the fire department. Furthermore, the budget designates $532,000 for the purposes of expansions, improvements, and replacements. This fund also uses a 1/8 of 1% sales tax, and it can only be used for fire department purposes. Our drainage fund also presents a balanced budget with projected revenues and expenditures accounting to $5.5 million. To address the impact of inflation in this fund, a sum of $25,000 has been allocated for add-backs. Additionally, budget allocations of $437,000 have been designated for expansions, improvements, and replacements. The current revenue to expenditure balance is available if the compensation plan on the unfunded list is approved by council. If not, this amount will be directed towards a capital project. We currently have $5.2 million available for allocation in CIP related to drainage projects. And this fund also uses revenue to cover all of the expenditures, and they are used for drainage purposes, drainage projects only, and we will go over this a little bit more later in the presentation, how those funds will be used. The 4B fund operating budget presents a balanced financial outlook, projecting revenue at $10.7 million and expenditures at $9.2 million. To mitigate the effects of inflation, $86,000 has been earmarked for add-backs. Additionally, a budget allocation of $163,000 has been assigned for the integration of new programs and positions. The 4B fund for fiscal year 23-24 introduces one additional position, an aquatics technician for the Parks and Recreation Department. Furthermore, the budget designates $1.1 million for the purposes of expansions, improvements, and replacements. This is also a sales tax supported fund, and it can be used for parks and library purposes.
So council, you guys have already heard about, on the various TERS boards, what the projects are going to be for those, but these are your TERS funds. TERS 1 primarily is being spent on paying for the Lewisville Grand Debt Service, that we continue to make those payments. TERS administration, and then there's also additional dollars set aside for purchase of land. TERS 1 is in your Old Town area and can only be spent on those projects designated under your TERS project plan. But primarily, the majority of that is being spent on debt service for your Grand Theater. TERS 2 is going to be in our southern gateway, close to Hebron Station. So there, there were economic development agreements associated with that particular TERS, where we are reimbursing a developer for the infrastructure that was put down there. And so we are continuing to make those payments to them. Also, money set aside for TERS administration. TERS 3 is going to be your Castle Hills TERS. There we have TERS administration. We also have an economic development agreement that was tied to the annexation of Castle Hills. And there you have reimbursements to the developer, again, on two things. One is infrastructure as well as economic development. You guys had signed an economic development agreement on the front end, which allows staff to work with the developer as long as they meet certain criteria to be able to get reimbursed for economic development. And then most importantly is debt service related to Castle Hills is also funded out of that TERS. TERS 4, that is your northern gateway, and that has, right now, most of the increment is being banked with the idea that we will hopefully extend that TERS to the lake area. With that, though, the expenditures out of that are going to be administration as well as for some park maintenance related to 2 parks and a median along Summit Avenue.
In the simplest terms possible, can we say what a TERS is, for those that don't know?
Yeah, so it's a tax increment financing district, and what it does is it's a tool to really reinvest in a specific area for specific purposes that are defined by that creation documents of the TERSs. So typically the benefit to that is you lock in at the beginning of the TERS your value on the ground, and then any increment above that goes back into that area. So it doesn't go to necessarily to your general, it doesn't go to your general fund, it stays within that district. So it's really, the more development you get there, the more increment you get, and then you reinvest it, and the hope is to kind of supercharge those areas for development. Or you could be using it to fund a specific infrastructure. So like, for example, the Grand Theater, that was how that was funded, was the creation of that TERS. The only difference with talking about the increment is with TERS 3 with Castle Hills, that base value, and that's what Deanne was talking about earlier, which was a reduction to your property tax projections, is the base value that was on the ground before annexation actually goes into the TERS as well. So that makes it a little bit more difficult from an administrative standpoint, but that was how we were able to structure that to be able to get Castle Hills into the city and get sign off from the developer at that time. I'm trying to think if there's something else I was going to. Oh, yeah, that was what I was going to say. And the other part of TERS is that's really beneficial because the city can always bring it into their general fund and just decide they're going to spend it in a certain place, but is that you can get the county to sign on to these as well to put their increment. So the county is a participant in TERS 1, 2, and 3. They are not yet a participant in TERS 4, but we are going to be requesting that they also sign on.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to revisit ARPA funding. This is the stimulus money that we were able to get through the federal government. The city, as you recall, we received $19.54 million. We received both of those tranches by middle of last year. There are deadlines that we need to meet to spend down those monies. We have until December of 2024 to fully encumber those monies, and December of 2026 to fully spend down those monies. When we first came to council to get direction on the use of those funds, we provided some general broad categories on how we were going to use it. Some of it was allocated to streets, but we didn't have specific projects identified. Same for water. We also have had some changes in where we would like to allocate, and we need to get, again, direction from council on that. So this table shows the original allocation that was presented to council back in 2021, and it provides information on streets, how much would be going towards that. Utility, we had broadband and sort of Lewisville monies. We had an amount going towards employee retention and consulting services. It's important to point that out. The consulting services, they're keeping us out of jail. They're going to make sure that we're in compliance with all the regulations, which are vast. As anybody that is involved in CDBG or any other spending of federal funds, there's a lot of hoops you need to jump to, and we want to make sure that we're getting sign off from a firm to make sure that we're allowed to use the monies the way we had hoped. So we have the original allocation and then the proposed allocation, again, spending the $19.54 million on specific streets related to North Mill, Indian Oaks, Elm Poydras, and Civic Circle. We have the public access broadband project that's currently being implemented. We have two specific projects related to the water and sewer, one at Indian Oaks and one at North Mill. For those amounts, we have the Serve Lewisville feasibility study. Originally, we had $350,000 allocated to that project. We no longer will need all those funds. The feasibility study is completed, so we reduced the allocation towards that. We slightly increased the portion that we would allocate to employee retention. There was one new project that we introduced to this, and that was the La Gloria Park funding. So a portion of the funding for that park renovation is going to come from the ARPA funds. And one other note I'll make is a number of these changes were made because of the timing requirements that we had earlier. We expect that we're going to be able to let for all these projects, either utility or the streets, to meet the timelines for the spend down for the bonds, or not for the bonds, for the stimulus monies.
Can we go back to that just for a second? I did want to clarify, so this chart here is really just showing where your ARPA dollars are being allocated. So when you look at this, I don't want there to be a misperception that Mackenzie Hembry is being defunded totally, or any of those others. We are making all of these projects whole. We are just shuffling where the federal dollars versus local dollars are going. The benefit to this also is you're going to have fewer number of projects. We know, like for example, we know that Elm and Poydras, Civic Circle, Indian Oaks, we are letting those projects next year. So we want to make sure we're keeping our federal dollars. We don't lose our federal dollars. So we may have taken ARPA funds and put them onto those projects. The projects that we took them off of are fully funded. And then finally, just wanted to point out that the benefit to this also is you're federalizing fewer number of projects. So when you federalize a project, it comes along with other requirements like Davis-Bacon Act compliance. And so this will make it a lot easier from a administrative standpoint, from our engineering department, from our parks department, as well as from our purchasing department in getting one project is going to be federalized, or fewer number of projects will be federalized. Wanted to pause on this to make sure that, are there any comments or questions on this from council?
None for me, just to reiterate for the folks, those projects are still a go, they're just not federally funded.
Yes.
And this slide just summarizes where we're allocating the ARPA funding, and I think we're just looking for, at some point, some direction from council to approve that. Okay. That's it.
Now onto the base budget.
So council, we're going to do a deeper dive by priority, but I wanted to, these are all of the action steps that were funded. They would include, later on, we're going to talk about if it fell under one of your priorities and it's over $50,000, but these are inclusive of everything. I'm just going to jump through to a couple of them that are just kind of probably public interest and council interest. So one on here, let's see, I'm already on old. Missing a soul. Okay. So on Old Town, we're going to talk through most of these. Let me see if there's anything else. The Lewisville Grand Theater client booking software, we are at end of life on our current client booking software, and this is going to provide a greater amount of flexibility and tools to enable more people. Our position that sells space at the Grand Theater, it'll make it easier for us to get more people to come in and fill. We can go to the next one. On extending the green, the mowing contract increase, I want to just point out that this is not getting you any additional mowing. This is just additional costs associated with continuing. So unfortunately, that's the case. We'll go to the next one. For diverse and thriving neighborhoods, we're going to talk about a lot of these. Let's see if there's anything on here. I think most of these we're going to talk about that are really interesting. So we can go next. The public art consultant, I think, public art consultant is interesting. We, when we started doing our public art projects, we really have just absorbed that the amount of work into our Community Relations and Tourism Department. Denise Helbing has really been at the helm of that. This is hiring a consultant to help us not only facilitate the choosing of art, but also the installation of art so that we can help that team with the increase of public art we want to do in the future. Our increase to art support grants is interesting. We reduced that during COVID, and so this is just returning that back to prior funding. It is important to note that this is not actually going to get you any additional shows. It's, as everyone has additional costs, this is to make sure we can maintain the current number of shows and activities that we have through our art support grant. Our Centennial Committee planning, so we are about to come into our 100-year birthday, and so with 2025 right on the horizon, we are going to, as most cities do, have a year of partying, a year of celebration. And so really James Kunke's team is putting together a Centennial Committee for planning. This is to get to seed that, because we're gonna need a logo, marketing plan, an online history website, and photo archives and other early expenses related to that. We have an increase in our library materials per capita, so that's just to make sure that we are achieving the same level, and actually getting slightly better with regard to our material selections at the library. Also in that, which I think is interesting, is that they are going to be adding, let me see what it's called, Full America's News portion, so that you'll be able to get greater access to newspapers as well as high-level magazines that will be for free with just your library card. You also have, let's go to the next one. You have, sorry. The crane body and lease payments, I think we had some questions from council members on this. This is really just to make sure you have a vehicle. When you have water utilities trying to pull giant pipes out of the ground, it's good to have the bed of your truck be able to hold when it moves and weight, shifts from one side to another. You can get a crane body for a truck that helps make sure that you're protecting that vehicle and can achieve what you're trying to do. Otherwise, a lot of times they're having to take a truck and carry another piece of equipment in that truck out to the field. This will allow the truck to be able to do what they're needing them to do. We'll go to the next one. Just interesting thing is outsourcing HR drug testing. So right now, if someone gets in an accident, at any time, our HR department has to show up and do a drug test. And so this is outsourcing that, which is normal for a city our size. And this will help. I will be honest, I have asked a lot of our HR department since becoming city manager. I think we've put our HR department into overdrive. And so this is just ways to kind of take a little bit off of their plate. For data-driven, automated alerting system is an interesting project. This is going to allow for dispatch to take away some of the manual labor related to dispatching certain fire stations, so where it will be more GIS-based and be automatic when calls come in. It will also allow for tones not to have to be in the stations for waking people up in the middle of the night. You can actually deploy, if you just need an ambulance instead of a fire truck or engine, you would end up being able to deploy just the ambulance at a time. So it will be better for our firefighters as well as for our dispatchers. CityWorks and Amelia upgrades, I think there are some functionality issues related to CityWorks as well as Amelia. CityWorks primarily at least on the park side, as to how it was set up originally, and so we're looking to make those improvements. And obviously we'll look at, I think I've gotten a list of things from council members of things they want to see improved with Amelia, and so we will look to make sure we can achieve those before moving on to those upgrades. On boundary adjustments, this is a small amount. This is really just for surveying of areas, and you may not know that we have little tiny tiny areas around the fringes of our city, some that are kind of leave-outs with the annexation of Castle Hills that are just no man's land. They're very small. Most of them are very inconsequential. One of them does have an impact on enforcement on a road, and who is it, Carrollton or Lewisville, that enforces on a road. So we will be getting those boundary adjustment surveys done and then bringing it to council with boundary adjustments to clean those up in the next year. And then next,
I'm sorry, but before we move on real quick, there's a line item that caught my attention. So external attack monitoring services, I'm assuming this is going to increase our ability to prevent ransomware attacks and things like that. So you see government entities and municipalities get hit all the time with this.
sure.
That's what that's.
Let Chris Lee answer that.
Yes, thank you for the question. Good morning, Mayor, Council. With this action step, as you all well know, unfortunately, municipalities and cities, they're a prime target, low-hanging fruit, right, for hackers, if you will. What this service does for us, this really gives us, it's another layer in our systematic approach to security, but it really creates more of a proactive approach in that we can not only check, right now it will allow us to check the health, if you will, of our websites, of our IP addresses, right? To look to see if our systems themselves are vulnerable externally, right? So it's almost like you're doing your own pen testing, right? 100% of the time. But moreover, what it'll allow us to do is look at other entities' status as well, to see what their hygiene is, the people that we actually do business with. So very excited about this. This is a little different approach, but again, just one more layer in that security stack, if you will, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, next. And then here I thought an interesting one was the stack map software and hardware for City Hall lobby. This is a system that we're planning to look comparable to the library wayfinding improvements as well, but with the movement of City Secretary's office back to their old location on the other side of City Hall, we also moved Bernadette, who was kind of our main greeter and I think she's behind me somewhere probably, but we moved her to the City Secretary's office to be part of that suite and part of that team. But what that leaves is not people walk into City Hall and may not know where to go. And so this is having basically digitizing that need and having a software and hardware solution where you come in, if you walk in, you say, I need to get building permits, you can go to a screen and it will identify where you need to go. And it'll be the same system. We believe that's the best solution at this point, which is also for the library.
That online library cards, this is exciting to me as areas that they're on the periphery of our one library system that should make this more accessible for our residents that are maybe disconnected from the library in general. So that's exciting.
Absolutely, and we'll talk about that more in a little bit. Okay, next.
So now we're going to focus on action steps that fall within council priorities. These were the priorities that were established at the council retreat in March. And these are also focusing on action steps that are greater than $50,000.
So I'm going to provide a brief update of the infrastructure analysis that we provided to council back in March at the retreat. This is going to be, as I had mentioned before, an ongoing activity for us. So we're going to continue to refine and include more information, make it more useful for council to make decisions and for staff to make funding requests off of. Again, this is an update from what we provided in March. One of the big focuses this time around was on the other category. If you remember, we had categories involving infrastructure, which included streets and sidewalks, water, sewer. We had the other category, which was the catch-all, and we also had stormwater. For the other category, we found after diving in further that there were a number of items included in that already had a funding source or a funding vehicle for it. And for example, we had that for vehicles and for technology. So we removed those from that asset listing for the other category. We also removed from that the one-time expenditures that we wouldn't expect to need to refund again when we did a design study or some other type of study. We don't anticipate having to fund that in the future to redo that again. So we pulled that out. And then we also removed items that had original costs of less than $25,000, which would typically then fall into our operating budget. So with that, then we got a completely different picture of what the true other is. What that did then is it showed that we need to create some additional charting, and we'll have those at future updates for some of the other categories that we've identified. It's important to note that in the proposed budget, there's about $1.2 million that's being recommended to increase the funding towards these capital programs. This does not include the capital funding from the unfunded list. So each year, the council commits a significant amount of funding towards capital replacement, and it's shown here that for the different categories that we're going to present on today, that we're funding at above the lower bound average, and I'll define the lower bound average in the next slide. But on average, we're contributing about $56 million a year towards capital replacement, which is, after discussions with our consultant, that's very rare that cities are committing that kind of capital towards, or cash towards capital replacement, and that we're moving forward with a study like this to help further assess what the appropriate funding is moving forward. That annual contribution includes cash funding from either utilities or the general fund or other operating funds. It includes the general obligation bonds that we issue on an annual basis, and it also includes the utility water and sewer revenue bonds. Just a quick definition for the lower and upper bounds, and I think we touched on this earlier in March, but just for further clarification, the lower bound average is the minimum annual funding needed to support capital asset replacement over the next 10 years. So over the next 10 years, if we're meeting that lower bound average, we can support those that are expected to be replaced in the next 10 years. The upper bound average is for average funding that's needed to support going out for the next 20 years, in most instances 30 years for water and wastewater. So that's going to be much higher. It's going to capture a lot more of the bigger projects and obviously require additional funding. And for the purposes of this study, we've used current funding as the average amount of annual spending by capital asset category, whether it's infrastructure, water, wastewater, or other. This first chart shows total capital spending needs and the city's commitment towards that. So the total forecasted annual capital replacement spending needs for the city, and this excludes stormwater, is $46.5 million. Now, this is different from that $56 million number that I had shared earlier, because we had removed some of those other replacement programs, vehicle technology, from it. So when we bring this back to council in the future, we're going to have additional charts like this that show where we stand with vehicle, where we stand with technology. So the current funding is $46.57 million. The lower bound average is 42.8, and the upper bound average is 61.4. So you can see we're well above the lower bound average, which is a positive, but we still have a ways to go to get to the upper bound average. This is the same chart, but it's specifically for infrastructure, streets, and sidewalks. We're currently at $24.9 million. The lower bound average is 23.8, and the upper bound average is 33.7. So we're getting a little bit closer to the upper bound average with this, but there's still a ways to go. In this budget, there is a $200,000 additional funding request to support streetlight replacement, and that will be discussed a little bit later in the presentation. This next chart shows the water system and the funding that we have going towards it on an annual basis versus the lower bound average and the upper bound average. Similarly to what we've seen, our current funding is above the lower bound average, and the upper bound average is $13.6 million. We do have additional funding requests in this budget of $375,000 for meter replacement. This is the first year of a 2-year step increase. We will request the additional $375,000 in the fiscal year 2025 budget. Wastewater, there's no additional request for wastewater funding in this proposed budget. The current funding is $9.9 million. The lower bound average, $7.8 million, and the upper bound average is $11.1. Again, we're seeing funding above the lower bound average. And lastly, for the others category, if you remember previously, the current funding had been over $10 million, and we were well below the lower and the upper bound averages. But when we extracted those previously funded items and removed for the one-time cost or those projects that were under $25,000, it paints a different picture. So the current funding for other projects is $1.7 million. This would be things like machinery and equipment that's not on any other capital replacement program or specifically just other types of projects. The lower bound average is $1.3 million and the upper bound average is $2.9 million. There is an additional request for funding for radios of $627,000. This is the first year of a 2-year progression. Additionally, there would be $337,000 requested for fiscal year budget 2025. So just in summary, we're going to continue to review and refine and update these sheets. We're going to add more information as we prepare it. Paints a different picture, a more detailed picture of what we're trying to do. One of the other big steps that we're going to take is we currently have existing funding sitting in our capital improvement project funds that are previously allocated monies, either through cash or for bonds, that we've allocated to projects. So we're going to see to the extent that they impact the annual funding for these different categories. So we'll do a review of that as well. I just want to note that the current funding that we have is I know I have sufficient there, and it probably should be exceeds the lower bound average. It's a positive. I think that's a strong commitment that City Council has made towards funding capital projects and ongoing replacement of those. And lastly, with the long-term strategy that we're going to follow, we're going to, again, smartly increase funding commitments towards the upper bound averages, and you're going to see some of that a little bit later in today's presentation. We're going to move from reactive to predictive. We had been reactive, and I think we've become more proactive now with identifying the needs, but I think we can get more predictive with the funding as we get more detail about when it would be best to fund a certain item or forego it for another item, how prioritize better. And then this is going to come with enhanced data collection. And again, this is going to be a report that we'll have to council at a future date.
I have a question.
Sure.
Am I close enough? So I assume on all these charts, which I love, by the way, I get really excited about these charts. So, you know, the gray that's showing the peak of the needs of when we're going to, I'm assuming that there is a very extensive spreadsheet or database or something that's feeding into that I would be fascinated to see. But just a quick question, are the needs mapped out based on age or condition? Is there is it based on a report card type deal for our infrastructure, or is it just based on how old it is?
Right now, these numbers are showing based on age and expected life, but then within that, what we'll do on an annual basis is we'll take things like PCI ratings and prioritize those projects and which ones get done. So again, that's going to be part of the whole data, because right now, we took a snapshot of our assets, we determined life expectancy and then replacement cost. From there, now we're going to start implementing or instituting additional metrics to help us make better decisions on where that money is and how much we fund towards it.
Okay.
David, on these metrics, is there any debt service incorporated into this? Any expectation that we're going to have debt, or is this getting to 100% pay-as-you-go for all of these funds?
No, there's an assumption that there's debt service on a regular basis that contributes to it. So the desire would be get to the 50% level. I think we're going to get there over time, but that would be the goal.
Gotcha. Okay, so yeah, that's where I was going, was this is going to feed back into that pie chart at the very beginning where we're trying to get from that low 40s up into 50-50.
Yeah, so I think what we'll do is on a year-by-year basis, we'll show the progression and how that is improving.
Great. Thank you very much.
Going to move into some of our funded action steps within this City Council priority of city infrastructure and facilities. The first project is the portable radio replacement. This is a city-wide replacement. It includes public safety, parks, public services, and also animal services. This is the first year of 2-year funding. This year includes $2.5 million in one-time costs and $628,000 in ongoing costs. There is also funding available in capital improvement projects to help fund this for the first year. And then the $627,000 includes setting up a replacement plan for these radios so that in the future we won't have the one-time cost like this.
I've got a question here. This says the end of life is December of 2023. What is the lead time on the ordering of this stuff?
Chief Deaver, do you want to speak to that?
What was the last part of the question?
What's the lead time with everything is getting here so much slower that...
We are told that the new portables will be available. In December of 23, they will stop producing replacement parts. So those radios will continue to work until they fail. Once they fail, then that radio is down and out of service.
Let's hope they don't fail. How long do they last? What is
The radio itself will last a long time. We haven't had an upgrade like this in probably 8 to 10 years since we first went to digital, but now the software is changing rapidly, and these radios will offer cellular backup if we can't reach a radio tower, Wi-Fi backup, so a lot of different technology that is available now.
Thank you.
We have, for the replacement plan, we've set up 5 years for public safety. Those radios recommend a 5-year replacement, and then we also have 7 and 10, depending on the type of radio that it is. So that will be included in the replacement plan. The next project that we funded is for the fire training tower. We currently have a little over $5 million in this project, and this is an additional $1 million that is going to be paid by the city of Lewisville. We will also have contributions from Flower Mound and Highland Village for this. This is once again related to cost overages due to inflation and things of that nature.
I wanted to clarify, so the $5 million includes the money that Flower Mound and Highland Village had already given to us as well. So that's what we have in the project currently, because we're holding it for all 3 entities.
Next, we have replacement of temporary construction meters. This is funded at $124,000. These are meters that are checked out to contractors. They're aging, and we have about 25% of them that need to be replaced. And so that includes that replacement. We have DWU, Dallas Water Utilities, and Upper Trinity purchase water rate increases at $1.9 million. And we have wastewater treatment plant odor control media replacement at $73,000. Next, we're to the automated meter infrastructure and lead service lines, and Aaron is going to speak to this.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. These are really 2 projects that we've converged into one, primarily because they happen in the same place, which is at the water meter. And so we gained some efficiency through combining these 2 projects. The issues that are before us, the EPA amended their lead and copper rule to include the requirement to determine the material at each water service line. So what we're used to is dealing in the public space. The difference in this rule is that it also requires us to determine the material on the private side of the meter. And so staff has gone through an extensive effort to try to be able to definitively define those services that do not contain lead without actually physically going on site. So we've gone through, I'm sorry, can you go back a slide? So we've gone through as-built drawings, a lot of historical data, but the biggest issue is being able to look at the building code. And I'm sorry, one second. So we were able to look at the building code and determine that anything built after 1989 does not contain lead. So that reduces the number of services that we have to visit physically, which down to about 10,500. That's still a pretty big effort, so that's part of a contract that's included in this project. The other part of the project is tackling meter reading, which is the automated meter infrastructure. So currently we're actually reading those meters manually, and that's about $300,000 a year that we pay a contractor to do that in Legacy, Lewisville. And then that's for the residential meters. For the commercial meters, we are reading those with a radio read system. And then in Castle Hills, we're reading those with a radio read system as well. That accounts for about 80 labor hours per month, or about a half of a position. The reason that takes that much effort is the radio read system in Castle Hills isn't quite working at the level that we'd like it to. So the other issue that this project will address is the meter availability. So analog meters really are not just a technology that's going away, it's a technology that's almost gone. So the lead time on those analog registers is about 6 to 8 weeks. And the reason for that is the manufacturers are only making those when they're ordered. They don't keep any in stock because it's a small number of their customers that actually use analog meters. And then the other issue is the analog meters they really limit our ability for customer service because of the limited amount of data that they provide. And we'll talk quite a bit about the added data and the added customer service that an AMI system provides at some future slides. And then the other issue that we'll solve through this project is the issue of being able to find where those existing meters are. So our meter locations are not currently captured in our GIS mapping. So they're really just mapped to the center line of the parcel. So in an emergency situation where a home has a big water leak, we want to be able to find those meters very quickly. And so part of this project is to geocode where those meters are. Go to the next slide. So just to recap this project, it includes identifying the unknown water service materials by physically going to those 10,500 meters and digging those up and seeing what they are, geocoding each meter's location, and then upgrading all of the registers on the meters. And then this is separate from the meter replacement program, which will continue forward. This project is simply replacing the analog meters with AMI meters. So the overall cost of the project is about $9.5 million. In this year's budget, we are contributing to this project just under $2.7 million for one-time funding and $368,000 for ongoing funding. Of that $68,000 approximately is for software subscription, and then the other $300 is planning for the replacement of these registers because they have about a 15-year life on them. So we're also planning for the replacement of them as well.
I did want to pause there because I had a council member ask me about, I just wanted to clarify that. So we are going next year into our 7th year of meter replacement. If you still are one of those folks in Lewisville that have an old meter, it's going to be replaced. So I don't want anyone to think they have to wait 2 more years for this project to happen for that meter to be replaced. We're moving forward with your meter replacement. This is just the second phase, which will be to change out your register.
So I have a question about the lead services. So actually, I'm shocked by the date of 1989, that up until 1989, lead was still able to be used. I assume that there was a period of time where they were starting to phase it out. So 89 would be when they said no more, right? So there's a gray area, I assume, between 89 and sometime before that, where it could be lead or it could be something else. Do you know what that time frame is?
So I believe federally, 1979 was a period where a lot of cities adopted that building code. However, Lewisville didn't adopt it until 89. The reality is we don't expect to find a lot of lead service lines within that gray area, but we can't definitively say in Lewisville that we can for sure know that they're not lead until after 89.
Okay, and so when we go to check all of these manually, will there be any notification to the homeowners that there's going to be somebody digging in their yard or?
Absolutely, yes. We will communicate ahead of time to let them know that project is coming. And then on the backside, we'll also communicate with them if we find lead, we will definitely communicate that with them. And then there are potentially federal funds to help them with the replacement of those lines, and we'll be helping them with that as well.
Perfect, thank you.
So I just wanted to thank the city manager for that clarification, because that was my question. I wanted to make sure that people who have been on the list for quite some time waiting on the meter replacements, because I first initially got on council and we were replacing the meters. I am in full support of this upgrade. I think it provides accuracy and the ability for our residents to read their own meters real time. They can watch that. Now, the caveat to that, you're not going to be happy because it's going to be accurate. And it may not have been accurate now, but you will be able to see what's going on, and it'll allow you to see if there's any water leakage. But I'm glad we got that clarification so that the folks who've been on the list for a while will get their upgraded meters. Thank you.
So as always, we like to, with any project, make sure that we're in line with council's priorities. And one of the ways that we do that is take a look at Lewisville 2025. And so this project is really big in the sustainability area. Water conservation is going to be greatly aided by the added data that this and tools that this project will provide. And I'll go into detail in that as well. And then fuel consumption is another part of the sustainability piece to this project. So as I mentioned earlier, we have a full-time employee driving Castle Hills, reading meters. So that's this project, by eliminating that effort, will conserve fuel as well. And then data is what this project is mostly about too. It's going to greatly enhance our data availability, and it's going to give us actionable data so that we can make better decisions about our system, and really more importantly, give data to the customer so they can make better decisions about their water consumption. And then it will also provide some great communication tools for us that are really automated through the system through leak detection, so that the customer is more informed about what's happening with their water consumption. The other piece that is really key in an emergency situation, as I mentioned earlier, we not only were we not able to find some of the meters during Winter Storm Uri to get them turned off quickly, sometimes people had left, so they weren't home, and they had water leaks in their home that were causing extensive damage to their home. And under an analog system, the only way that we find out that there's a leak is if they call and report that. Well, under an AMI system, it actually has leak detection. So it will be able to alert us, even if a resident isn't home, that they have a leak in their homes, and we can turn their water off and minimize the damage.
Quick question. So after this is all done and the previous meter, I guess, change out, well, I guess every house will know where the meter is at if there's any question. And when they go out and change the meter out, and they find them, if there's a question, when they find the meters, when we do this second phase in the lead testing, I assume after this will be no question where the meter's at on a house?
Correct, because those will be geocoded. That will actually be uploaded into our GIS mapping, so we will know the exact location of those meters. So the crew in the field can look up in the map and see exactly where that meter is.
Great, thank you.
So this is just a view of what city staff will see with the software for leak alert handling. I wanted to give you just a kind of a view into the way the software works. It actually prioritizes the alerts for us and helps us to manage that process, and then also gives us some historical data on flow and when that flow happens, so that we're more informed on what our customers are doing and how to best address issues. And then this slide is a view of what the customer actually sees. And it gives them several very useful tools to take control of their water consumption. The top left is really just showing their flow history and gives them a detailed chart of when their flow is happening, which is helpful for them to analyze how to reduce their water consumption. And then in the bottom left, they can actually compare to the average Lewisville customer. So it gives them perspective on their consumption as well. They can set monthly budgets. It has leak alerts that go directly to them, and they can choose how they receive those alerts through either through email or text. So that gives them a lot of tools to manage their consumption and to limit it as well. And with any software, there's an app for that, so this one's no exception, and this is just showing that they have all access to all these tools and data through right on their phone. So as I mentioned earlier, we have a half of an employee driving Castle Hills to read meters and do rereads. Today, we expect to recover most of that time after the implementation of the AMI registers. And so what we plan to do with those recovered hours is to bolster our large meter testing. And the reason we want to do that is, as you know, meters, as they become inaccurate, it is always in the favor of the customer, so that means lost revenue for the city. So if you think about a 6 or an 8-inch meter that is inaccurate, that can account for quite a bit of lost revenue. So we want to make sure that we're staying on top of that. And the difference between a residential meter and a large commercial meter in the way we, from a replacement schedule standpoint, we don't just replace those on a time frame because of their high cost. So we take a look. We only do maintenance and replace those when they're losing accuracy. So there's a lot more effort in testing those meters than there is on a residential meter, and instead of just replacing them on a schedule. So as enhanced data is a big piece of this project. Has two-way communication, allows us to access demand reads. Of course, it's around the clock, time synchronized, so we know exactly when the flow is happening. It's actually on 15-minute increments, which is really helpful, specifically for our utility billing group. When we have any kind of a question or complaint about a high bill or any question about the consumption on a bill, gives our staff tools that they can drill into that data and show exactly when consumption is happening. And that's really what the key is, identifying any water leaks. I've had instances where customers have come in the past with a system like this that they claim there is absolutely no way I'm using that much water. And when you can show them exactly when it's happening, more often than not, it's an irrigation system that they didn't realize was running every day because they'd moved into a new house or something like that. So it's really helpful to have that data at our fingertips. End-to-end security as well. So all of this really just empowers us to manage our water meter assets, analyze our water system. One additional screen that I'm not showing in the presentation, but is key for us on our side, is that we have the ability to show like a heat map for consumption. So we can see the areas of our system that have higher consumption than others, which help us really tweak our water system and make it run as efficiently as it can. And then at least as importantly, it enables our consumers to take charge of their conservation efforts because they know exactly what's happening in real time as they consume water.
I thought also what was interesting, talking with Aaron about this, is that if you have days for watering and we have water restrictions put on, you can see who's not following those water restrictions, and you can send Everbridge notifications to people that are saying, hey, you're not, because I think majority of people would follow it, they're just not paying attention. So we can send friendly reminders, and then those, if it gets really extreme, then we can move to next level, but that's our hope, is to get compliance, right?
Right, and it really helps us focus our education efforts as well, because we know what people are doing, what time of day they're doing it, and those kinds of things. So it helps us to help them manage their water consumption better. So as always, we also compare to our peers and want to know what they're doing in a particular area, and this project is no different. And so this graph is just showing you what our comparison cities are doing with respect to AMI. So the cities that are currently using AMI are Allen, Capel, Fort Worth, Frisco, Grand Prairie, Irving, McKinney, Mesquite, and Plano. And then those actively converting to AMI, which means they have a funded project and they are actively in the process of converting over. Arlington, Grapevine, Richardson, and Carrollton. And then Dallas and Denton are also converting to AMI soon as well. And so Flower Mound has an AMR system, which is the drive-by system where you have to drive every street. Not as good as AMI, but certainly better than, more efficient than manual read. And then, unfortunately, the sole little sliver of the pie that's orange there is Lewisville, which is, we are the only manual read city. So with that, I'm happy to answer any other questions you might have with this project.
So first, I love the program. I think it's great. I got hit with 2 $500 water bills last summer. I think we talked about this before, because I did exactly what you were talking about. Is our meter, our water, our sprinklers are going off every night for 2 months. We didn't realize it. I looked for leaks and everything else. It didn't occur to me that might be my irrigation system. So we got hit with this. So this will help flush it out for other people that make the same mistake. I am curious about, we talk about increased revenue, decreased labor. It's a $10 million charge, and again, I love it. I think it's worth doing regardless. But do we have any concept of how much the efficiencies will offset against that 9 whatever million?
As far as just kind of an ROI analysis,
Low cost of ownership kind of
I do, and let me grab this. So what I did is really break it down to, because it does not pay for itself in all honesty, but I wanted to break it down to what is the cost of this added service. And it really accounts to about $206,000 a year of cost. But just to put that in perspective, that's about 0.4% of our annual expected revenue. So
it could be zero and still worth doing. So I was just curious. Thank you.
Just to put a little history on this, last time we looked at this, the life expectancies of these digital appliances was about 10 years. Yeah, it was really low, and so the turnover, they were dying, a lot like solar panels. By the time you've amortized them out, there's no gain, and so council at that time kind of held off, which is I think part of the reason why we're the orange sliver at this point, is because just the return was not there at the time. Now, obviously, none of the software integrations, the information back end, none of that was even contemplated at the time. It was simply the ability to capture that data by either driving by or over a wireless type of network. So the tremendous amount of added value. I heard a 15-year life expectancy, which is considerably more than what it used to be. So that was, I think, those are ideas there that make this a lot more palatable to me this time around, which is great. I appreciate our conservative approach to this particular project because it's disruptive however we do it.
Can I just add on his return on investment? That includes an annual replacement payment that we're setting aside that we aren't currently doing now.
Okay.
So if you took that out, it would be a much closer.
Oh, great. Okay, thank you.
Unless there are any more questions, I'm going to go ahead and give us about a 12-minute break. So with that, we're going to go 10:50. We will return back to session.